Gunfire in the boardroom of Harrison Financial was a normal Tuesday for Gabriel Moretti, but being publicly humiliated by a plus-size forensic accountant, unprecedented. When Dakota Gallagher looked Chicago's deadliest crime lord dead in the eye and mocked his sheer arrogance, she ignited an intensely dangerous, completely undeniable obsession. Dakota Gallagher knew exactly how the world saw her. At 5'4" and 230 pounds, she was practically invisible in the sleek, predatory world of corporate finance until someone needed a target for their insecurities. She didn't have the razor-sharp cheekbones or the sample-size waistline of the receptionists who guarded the glass doors of Harrison Financial. What she did have, however, was a terrifyingly brilliant mind for numbers and a complete lack of patience for incompetent men. Harrison Financial was a front. Dakota had figured that out by her third week on the job. The obscure offshore routing the phantom LLCs operating out of the Cayman Islands, the sudden influx of untraceable cash disguised as real estate investments. It all pointed to one thing: organized crime, specifically the Moretti Syndicate. But Dakota kept her mouth shut, did her job, and ate her glazed donuts in the break room without apologizing to anyone. She needed the premium health insurance for her mother's dialysis, and she wasn't about to let a little money laundering get in the way of her family's survival. Everything changed on a rainy Thursday in November. Gunfire had echoed through the executive suites before the morning coffee had even finished brewing. When the heavy mahogany doors of the accounting department violently swung open, the air in the room instantly dropped 10 degrees. Gabriel Moretti had arrived to clean house. Gabriel was a terrifying force of nature. Standing over 6 feet tall, draped in a bespoke charcoal Italian suit that hid the lethal muscle beneath, he possessed a face carved from cold marble, and eyes as dead and black as the bottom of the ocean. He had just put 2 bullets into the kneecaps of the firm's senior partner for embezzling syndicate funds. Now he needed someone to untangle the financial mess left behind. His heavily armed lieutenants rounded up the remaining staff, herding them into the central glass-walled boardroom. Dakota sat at the far end of the long oak table, her thick thighs pressing against the armrests of a chair that was decidedly not designed for a woman of her curves. She calmly adjusted her thick-rimmed glasses and kept her hands folded over her stomach, refusing to tremble like the rest of the terrified junior accountants. Gabriel paced the length of the room like a caged panther. His boots crunched softly on the shattered glass covering the carpet. $3 million. His voice rumbled dangerously low and smooth. $3 million bled from my accounts over the last 6 months. Whoever fixes this lives. The rest of you will be replacing the foundations of my new casino. Silence choked the room. None of the Ivy League-educated gym bros sitting around Dakota dared to breathe, let alone speak. Dakota sighed, a loud, exasperated sound that cut through the terror. She reached into her leather tote bag, pulled out a thick, red-tabbed manila folder, and slid it across the polished oak table. It stopped precisely at Gabriel's fingertips. "It's not 3 million," Dakota said, her voice steady and unimpressed. "It's 4.2. Your senior partner was skimming, yes, but he was an idiot. The real hemorrhage is coming from your supply chain, routing through the docks. Someone on your own crew is double-billing the shell corporations." Gabriel stopped pacing. He slowly turned his dark gaze toward the end of the table, his eyes narrowing as he took in the woman who had just spoken. He looked at her thoroughly, and Dakota knew exactly what he was seeing. He saw her round face, the soft double chin, the wide hips that spilled over the edges of the corporate chair, and the rumpled cardigan that hid thick arms. Disgust flickered in his eyes, a look Dakota had seen 1,000 times from arrogant men who measured a woman's worth by her dress size. He picked up the folder, flipped through the first few pages, and scoffed, He dropped it back onto the table with a harsh slap. I need a forensic genius, not someone who can't even discipline herself at the dinner table. Gabriel sneered, his voice dripping with cruelty. He leaned forward, bracing his knuckles on the oak. You look like you'd get winded walking to the printer. If you want to work for me, sweetheart, lose 50 pounds. I don't employ sloppy people. If you can't control your own mouth, how can I trust you to control my money? The room collectively gasped. A few of the terrified male accountants actually snickered, grateful that the predator's attention had shifted to the fat girl. Dakota didn't cry. She didn't shrink into herself. The years of bullying, the cruel remarks from strangers, the constant societal pressure it had forged her skin into bulletproof titanium. Slowly she stood up. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor, and met the Mafia boss's dead black eyes with a blazing inferno of her own. My weight has absolutely nothing to do with my brain, Moretti. Dakota fired back, her voice ringing out like a cracked whip in the silent room. But since we're talking about discipline and sloppy behavior, let's talk about yours. You walked in here waving a gun like a B-movie gangster because you were too stupid to realize your own underboss is robbing you blind. I traced the phantom invoices directly to a shell company registered to a Vincent Rossi, your right-hand man. Gabriel froze. The temperature in the room plummeted further. The heavily armed guards standing by the door shifted nervously, gripping their automatic weapons tighter. No one spoke to Gabriel Moretti like this. No one. Dakota wasn't finished. She crossed her thick arms over her chest, stepping away from the table to stand at her full width, entirely unapologetic about the space she occupied. I can recover every single dime of that 4.2 million by Friday. She continued, her tone dripping with absolute authority. But I don't work for small-minded, arrogant thugs who confuse a woman's dress size with her intelligence. Keep the weight comments for the starving bimbos you parade around on your arm. You want my brain. You pay me double the standard rate you give me, full autonomy over the accounts, and you never, ever speak to me about my body again. Otherwise, shoot me right now, or watch your empire collapse under the weight of your own ignorance. Your move, boss. For 10 agonizing seconds, nobody breathed. Dakota stood her ground, her heart hammering violently against her ribs, but her chin held high. She fully expected a bullet right between the eyes. Gabriel stared at her. The disgust that had previously masked his features was entirely gone, replaced by a violent, unreadable intensity. He looked at the fire in her eyes, the proud tilt of her chin, and the soft, abundant curves she refused to hide or apologize for. He was surrounded by sycophants and terrified yes-men. He was used to women who starved themselves to fit an aesthetic, women who trembled when he entered a room. But this woman, this soft, heavy, brilliant creature, she had just verbally eviscerated him in front of his own men, held his financial empire hostage, and demanded respect with a gun pointed figuratively at her head. A slow, dark smirk curved the corner of Gabriel's mouth. The dark void in his eyes suddenly ignited with a terrifying, predatory spark. "Double the rate," Gabriel finally murmured, his voice now a dark, husky purr. "And a corner office. You start immediately, Miss Gallagher." He turned to his men. "Clear the building, and bring Vincent to the warehouse." He paused at the door, looking back over his shoulder at Dakota, his gaze lingering on her hips before dragging slowly up to her defiant face. "I look forward to our partnership, Dakota. Surviving Monday was one thing. Surviving the aftermath was entirely different." Dakota's life shifted overnight. She was no longer crammed into a dreary cubicle. Gabriel had moved her into a sprawling penthouse-level suite in his own heavily fortified corporate headquarters. The office was all floor-to-ceiling glass, black leather, and brushed steel. It was intimidating, just like the man who owned it. Dakota threw herself into the work. Unraveling Vincent's embezzlement web was complex, but to her, it was like a beautiful, intricate puzzle. She tracked the stolen millions through dummy corporations in Cyprus, fake shipping manifests in Naples, and inflated payrolls in Chicago. But the real complication wasn't the numbers. It was Gabriel. He started showing up unannounced. At first it was strictly business. He would stand over her shoulder, smelling of expensive bergamot cologne, gun oil, and danger, while she walked him through the ledgers. But soon the visits shifted. Gabriel would linger. He would sit on the edge of her massive mahogany desk, his long legs stretched out, simply watching her work. Dakota tried to ignore the heavy, suffocating weight of his stare. She was fiercely self-conscious, hyper-aware of how her stomach rolled when she sat or how her thighs spread against the leather chair. She kept waiting for the cruel remarks to return, for him to drop a comment about her eating habits or her size. But the insults never came. Instead, his gaze was heavy, calculating, and oddly hungry. On Thursday evening at 8 o'clock, the door to her office clicked open. Dakota didn't look up from her monitor, absent-mindedly reaching into a box of assorted truffles she had brought from her favorite bakery. "You're working late." Gabriel's deep voice resonated through the quiet room. Dakota popped a dark chocolate truffle into her mouth, chewing slowly before turning to face him. "Crime doesn't sleep, Mr. Moretti, which means your ledgers don't either. I've recovered $3 million. The rest is tied up in a Cayman account that requires physical verification, which I am actively hacking." Gabriel walked slowly toward her. He didn't stop until he was standing just inches from her chair. He looked down at the box of chocolates, then back up to her face. Dakota instantly stiffened, preparing her defenses for a remark about her weight. She braced herself to fight. Instead, Gabriel reached out his large, calloused fingers, gently brushing against the corner of her lips. Dakota's breath hitched in her throat. "Chocolate," he murmured, his thumb swiping a microscopic smudge from her skin. He didn't wipe it on a napkin. He brought his thumb to his own mouth and tasted it, his eyes never leaving hers. "I like a woman with an appetite." Dakota felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks. She swatted his hand away, strictly maintaining her professional armor. "Don't play games with me, Gabriel. I'm not one of your nightclub toys. I'm your accountant. You're much more than that, Dakota," he said softly, leaning down so his face was level with hers. "You take up space. You demand to be seen. Every other woman I know tries to shrink herself, tries to be less. Take up. Less eat, less. Speak less. But you're entirely unapologetic." "I am what I am," she replied, fiercely refusing to break eye contact. "I'm fat, Gabriel. You pointed it out yourself on day one. Let's not pretend you suddenly have a fetish for curves just because I saved your bank accounts." Gabriel's jaw tightened. A flash of genuine regret, a rare emotion for the Mafia boss, crossed his features. "I was a fool on day one. I insulted you to assert dominance because for the first time in my life, a woman didn't cower when I walked into a room. You terrified me, Dakota." And now, his gaze dropped to her full lips, then swept over the generous curve of her breasts beneath her silk blouse. "Now I can't stop thinking about you." Before Dakota could process the shocking confession, the heavy oak doors to her office violently burst open. Vincent stood in the doorway, bleeding from a cut above his eye, holding a suppressed 9mm pistol pointed directly at Dakota's chest. He had escaped the warehouse. "You fat, interfering bitch!" Vincent spat his eyes wide with desperate, cornered animal panic. "I spent 10 years building this family, 10 years, and you ruin it all with a few keystrokes. Dakota froze her blood, turning to ice. But before she could even gasp, Gabriel moved. He didn't just step in front of her. He practically eclipsed her, using his massive frame to completely shield her body from Vincent's weapon. "Vincent," Gabriel said. His voice wasn't loud. It was deadly quiet, carrying the chilling promise of a slow, agonizing death. "Lower the gun. If you even look at her for another second, I won't just kill you. I will dismantle everyone you have ever loved." "She ruined me, boss," Vincent screamed, his hand shaking. "She's a nobody, a glorified calculator. Move out of the way." "She is mine." Gabriel roared at the sound, vibrating the glass walls of the office. He reached slowly into his tailored jacket, and you made a fatal mistake thinking you could walk into her sanctuary. Tension snapped like a dry twig. Vincent fired. The haut of the suppressed weapon echoed, and Gabriel flinched, a bloom of dark red appearing on his left shoulder. But Gabriel didn't fall. With terrifying speed, he drew his own weapon and fired 3 shots in rapid succession. Vincent dropped to the floor, dead before his knees hit the carpet. Dakota screamed, jumping out of her chair. "Gabriel!" She rushed forward, catching his good arm as he swayed slightly. Her soft, heavy body braced against his hard, muscular frame, supporting his weight. Gabriel looked down at her, clutching his bleeding shoulder, but a deranged, possessive smile stretched across his face. He leaned his forehead against hers, breathing heavily. "See," he whispered, his good hand coming up to fist in her hair, pulling her face close to his. "I told you. You take up exactly the right amount of space, Dakota." "Enough to hold me up." He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, tentative kiss. It was a brutal, consuming clash of teeth and tongue, tasting of blood, adrenaline, and desperate obsession. Dakota's mind short-circuited. She had expected to be murdered, mocked, or fired. Instead, the most dangerous man in the city was bleeding on her floor, kissing her as if she were the only oxygen left in the room. And heaven help her, she kissed him back. The forensic accountant and the Mafia boss tangled together in the aftermath of violence. But Dakota didn't know that Vincent wasn't acting alone. The $4.2 million wasn't just a retirement fund for a rogue underboss. It was the buy-in for a rival cartel. And by exposing the theft, Dakota hadn't just saved Gabriel's empire, she had inadvertently painted a massive target on her own back. The obsession had just begun, but the real war was already knocking at their door. Gabriel's recovery was remarkably fast, fueled by sheer willpower and a terrifying new fixation. Dakota Gallagher had become his absolute center of gravity. He moved her entirely into his private estate, a sprawling, heavily fortified architectural marvel overlooking the freezing waters of Lake Michigan. She protested vehemently, citing her independence and her hatred for his hyper-masculine decor. But the threat from the Sinaloa cartel was incredibly real. Vincent's stolen $4.2 million had been a promised non-refundable deposit to the ruthless Mexican syndicate for a massive weapons shipment routing through O'Hare International Airport. By freezing those specific offshore accounts, Dakota had single-handedly halted the cartel's operations, making her their primary target. Dakota didn't cower. Instead of hiding, she converted Gabriel's massive mahogany dining room into a high-tech financial war room. Servers hummed alongside expensive Italian sculptures. She sat at the head of the table wearing soft, oversized sweaters that clung to her generous curves, surrounded by glowing monitors. Gabriel watched her constantly. He was completely mesmerized by the sharp, undeniable brilliance of her mind and the soft, abundant beauty of her body. Every time she reached for her favorite pastries, he watched the delicate movement of her plump lips, his dark eyes darkening with intense, possessive hunger. "You are staring again, Gabriel," Dakota said one evening, not even bothering to look up from the complex routing numbers flashing across her primary screen. She was tracing the cartel's secondary slush funds hidden within Credit Suisse private vaults. If you have nothing productive to do, please go interrogate someone in the basement. Your heavy breathing is incredibly distracting, and I have billions of dollars to reroute before midnight. Gabriel chuckled a low, rumbling sound that sent unexpected delicious shivers straight down her spine. He pushed off the doorframe and slowly approached her chair, his broad shoulders blocking the ambient light. He rested his heavy, calloused hands on her thick shoulders. "I am precisely where I want to be," Gabriel murmured, his thumbs massaging the tight muscles of her neck. "Watching my absolute greatest asset dismantle an international syndicate." Dakota scoffed, trying to ignore the heat radiating from his touch. "I am not your asset, Moretti. I am an independent contractor currently saving your entire empire from total collapse. Do not confuse employment with ownership." Gabriel leaned down, pressing a shockingly soft kiss against the sensitive skin just beneath her ear. "You are mine, Dakota. Every brilliant thought, every sharp insult, and every single gorgeous curve. You belong completely to me now. Accept it." Before she could formulate a sufficiently scathing reply, the compound's perimeter alarms violently shattered the romantic tension. Blaring sirens echoed through the luxurious halls. Gabriel's romantic demeanor vanished instantly, replaced by the terrifying, cold-blooded killer who ruled Chicago. He drew his weapon, his eyes scanning the security monitors. "Breach at the south gate," he snapped, dragging Dakota out of her chair and shielding her with his massive body. "Sinaloa hitmen. They found the blind spot in the camera loop." Dakota's heart hammered furiously against her ribs, but her mind remained razor-sharp. She scrambled back toward her encrypted laptop, her fingers flying incredibly fast across the illuminated keyboard. "What are you doing? Get down!" Gabriel roared, firing a suppressing shot through the shattered window as heavily armed men poured across the manicured lawns. "I am transferring the remaining cartel funds," Dakota shouted back, completely ignoring the bullets tearing through the expensive drywall above her head. "If I dump their Credit Suisse portfolios into a highly public-flagged Bank of America charity account, the federal authorities will immediately freeze their remaining operational capital," she typed furiously, her thick thighs planted firmly anchoring her against the chaos. She refused to be a helpless victim in this violent Mafia war. She was going to bankrupt them entirely. "Done." "Oh, Jonas," she screamed, slamming the enter key just as the heavy oak doors splintered inward. 3 cartel mercenaries stormed into the room, their automatic rifles raised. Gabriel moved with lethal, terrifying grace, dropping 2 of them with precise consecutive headshots before they could even pull their triggers. The 3rd mercenary, however, tackled Gabriel to the ground, knocking the weapon from his grasp. Dakota did not hesitate. She grabbed a heavy, solid bronze paperweight from her desk, marched forward with all her weight, and smashed it directly into the mercenary's skull, knocking him completely unconscious instantly. Gabriel pushed the heavy, limp body off him and stared up at Dakota. She stood over him, panting heavily, her chest heaving, holding the bloody paperweight like a conquering queen. She was magnificent, terrifying, and completely breathtaking. Gabriel slowly rose to his feet, ignoring the chaos outside as his remaining guards mopped up the stragglers. He walked over to her, entirely disregarding the blood staining his expensive shirt, and pulled her forcefully against his chest. His hands roamed unapologetically over her wide hips and thick waist, pulling her flush against his hard, muscular frame. "Have I mentioned how incredibly obsessed I am with you?" Gabriel whispered fiercely against her lips. "You are absolutely magnificent, Dakota." She dropped the heavy bronze paperweight, finally allowing her trembling hands to wrap securely around his thick neck. "Just shut up and kiss me, you terrifying idiot," she breathed. He obliged, devouring her mouth with a fiery, desperate passion that completely eclipsed the surrounding violence. She felt completely secure, entirely valued, and entirely desired. He worshipped her brain, but he undeniably worshipped her heavy, beautiful body just as fiercely. The dangerous Mafia boss had completely surrendered. The aftermath of the cartel attack completely shifted the power dynamics within the city. Word spread rapidly through the criminal underworld that Gabriel Moretti's new financial genius had not only survived a direct assault, but had actively bankrupted the local Sinaloa operation. Dakota Gallagher was no longer just an accountant. She was a terrifyingly untouchable legend. The men who had previously sneered at her size now lowered their eyes respectfully whenever she walked through the polished halls of the syndicate's downtown headquarters. She commanded absolute authority, and Gabriel ruthlessly enforced it with violent, unwavering dedication. Anyone who disrespected her mysteriously vanished. Despite the newfound respect, the danger was far from permanently eliminated. Alejandro Vargas, the regional cartel boss, was financially ruined and publicly humiliated. He demanded blood. Since he could no longer afford an army of mercenaries, he resorted to a desperate singular strike. It happened on a rainy Tuesday evening outside the Drake Hotel. Dakota had insisted on attending a private meeting with a Swiss banker to finalize the laundering protocols. Gabriel was delayed by a sudden strike at the docks, leaving Dakota with only 2 heavily armed bodyguards. It was a rare, vulnerable window of opportunity that Alejandro fiercely exploited. As Dakota stepped out of the luxurious hotel lobby, a black armored SUV aggressively jumped the curb. The doors slid open, and a hail of gunfire instantly dropped both of her seasoned bodyguards. Before Dakota could even react, 2 massive enforcers grabbed her thick arms and violently shoved her into the back of the waiting vehicle. Alejandro sat opposite her, his face twisted in pure, unadulterated hatred. He pressed the cold steel barrel of a revolver directly against her forehead. "You cost me everything, you fat, meddling bitch," Alejandro hissed, his breath smelling of stale whiskey and utter desperation. Dakota's heart slammed wildly against her ribs, but her titanium spine held firm. She remembered the absolute fearlessness Gabriel possessed, and she channeled it perfectly. She looked down at the gun, then back up at Alejandro's bloodshot eyes, and let out a cold, condescending laugh. "You think killing me will retrieve your money, Alejandro?" She mocked, her voice dripping with pure disdain. "I am an accountant. Do you honestly believe I leave billions of dollars unencrypted if my pulse stops a dead man's switch, activates instantly, sending all your offshore ledgers to the federal authorities?" Alejandro hesitated, a flicker of genuine doubt crossing his enraged features. "You are bluffing?" Dakota leaned forward, pressing her forehead intentionally against the cold barrel of his gun, entirely unapologetic and fiercely defiant. "Pull the trigger and find out," she challenged him softly. "Gabriel will butcher you slowly for taking me, but the FBI will completely dismantle your entire bloodline once they see the files. You are absolutely powerless here, Alejandro. I hold your entire life in my heavy, capable hands." The sheer audacity of her savage response left the cartel boss entirely speechless. Suddenly, the armored SUV was violently rammed from the side. The massive impact shattered the reinforced windows and sent Alejandro sprawling across the leather seats. The SUV skidded aggressively across the wet pavement, crashing brutally into a concrete barrier. The doors were ripped open before the dust even settled. Gabriel stood there, looking like an absolute demon, summoned directly from hell. He dragged Alejandro out by his hair, throwing him onto the rain-slicked street. Gabriel didn't even draw his gun. He simply beat the cartel boss into unconsciousness with his bare, bloodied hands. Once Alejandro was completely neutralized, Gabriel rushed back to the wrecked vehicle. He reached inside his hands, frantically searching for injuries. Dakota climbed out, bruised and shaken, but incredibly victorious. She fell directly into his chest. "I had it completely handled," she mumbled against his ruined wet suit, wrapping her thick arms tightly around his waist. "I know," Gabriel breathed, kissing the top of her head repeatedly. "I know you did, my brilliant queen. But I refuse to let anyone else have the sheer pleasure of watching you entirely destroy your enemies." The federal authorities received the encrypted financial ledgers exactly 24 hours later. Dakota had orchestrated the entire data dump, flawlessly ensuring that absolutely nothing traced back to Harrison Financial or the Moretti Syndicate. The Sinaloa cartel's regional infrastructure completely collapsed overnight. Bank accounts were violently frozen. Safe houses were simultaneously raided by specialized tactical teams, and dozens of high-ranking lieutenants were permanently imprisoned. Alejandro Vargas was handed directly to the FBI, neatly packaged with an undeniable mountain of damning evidence. Dakota had successfully waged a devastating corporate war, using only her keyboard and her brilliant tactical mind. Gabriel watched the news reports from their luxurious living room, a deeply satisfied smirk playing across his handsome, scarred face. He poured 2 glasses of incredibly expensive vintage bourbon, carrying them over to where Dakota sat comfortably on the oversized leather sofa. She was entirely engrossed in a new spreadsheet, her thick, gorgeous legs draped elegantly over his lap as he sat down beside her. He handed her the heavy crystal glass, his thumb gently caressing her soft ankle. She was undeniably the most lethal, magnificent weapon he had ever possessed, and she was entirely his forever. Months later, the Chicago underworld was entirely stable under their joint rule. They stood together on the massive balcony of their penthouse overlooking the glittering skyline. Dakota wore a stunning, custom-made crimson silk gown that hugged every single one of her beautiful heavy curves perfectly. Gabriel stood closely behind her, his large arms securely wrapping around her generous waist, resting his chin affectionately on her soft shoulder. He no longer demanded she lose weight. He demanded the entire world make room for her immense brilliance and unapologetic presence. She was his absolute equal in every conceivable way. "You completely changed my entire world, Dakota," Gabriel whispered, sliding a massive, flawless diamond ring onto her left hand. "You walked into a room full of killers and absolutely commanded us all. I am endlessly obsessed with your beautiful mind and your perfect body." Dakota smiled, leaning back into his solid strength, admiring the heavy jewel sparkling under the city lights. She had started out as a marginalized, invisible accountant, but she had ruthlessly conquered the city's most dangerous man. "Good," she purred softly, turning to capture his lips. "Because I am never shrinking again. Drop a quick comment below with your favorite scene. Wow, what a roller coaster of danger, romance and fierce confidence. Dakota proved that true power comes from owning exactly who you are without apologizing to anyone. If you loved watching this brilliant plus-size queen bring Chicago's deadliest mafia boss to his knees, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this story with your friends and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, dramatic romance videos every single week.